Welcome aboard, Aaron. Thank you for figuring out Riverside and finding the podcast link. Now that I've turned on recording, it's possible that people will be able to join us and listen live. Let me just see if anybody is joining us. Let me see. Anybody out there? If you are, please, there's something in the chat. I think people can see us or hear us. Hey, people say they're here. Okay.
Awesome.
Great. So this works this time. I
You
am a new
will
podcast host, so it doesn't always work.
no, it worked out. We'll say problem existed between keyboard and chair, right? The old class
Yes.
headcack error. So apologies. I'm glad to be here. Certainly appreciate your patience here and getting this all started. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So let's have some fun. Why don't we start? People know me. I'm the what am I? VP of programs at DAMA LA. My name's John Miller, and we're just getting started with this podcast series at DAMA LA. And why don't you introduce yourself, Aaron, so that folks know who you are and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah. So I'm Aaron Ansari. I'm the principal, I guess, co-managing director at Answer Consulting. And
Okay.
consulting is think of a group of really smart people that got together to solve problems for enterprises and businesses alike. Some of the members that you have as part of DAMA have been either employed by or employed with Answer Consulting at one time or another. And myself and Shannon, who's the other business partner, sort of launched this off of another organization a couple of years ago, about a year, maybe a year and a half ago. And, how we solve business problems is by bringing the smart people in the room together,
Yeah.
learning, analyzing the problems, and then presenting, solutions. And that sounds very simple, but oftentimes what we find is that people will come into the room with a solution in mind, or they've
Yeah.
got this hammer that's in search of a nail, right? Like, here's the thing, right? AI is going to fix the audio. Here's this thing that I have. Let's go find a problem to apply it to. And that's just not how we can do it. So
Yeah.
we like to take the approach that starts at the beginning, sort of, to use the agile development methodology, shifts left, goes to the beginning of a project and a program, and then builds requirements and then provides technology related solutions to solve those problems.
Okay. Now, I love the language you're using because I'm a consultant from way back. And I remind myself that people love it when I use plain English. So let me ask you a sort of a simpler question about you and your firm. You started it for a reason to bring smart people in front of customers and help them think about it and how to tackle it with maybe letting go of their preconceived notions and opening them up to what is possible and what you can do for them. Dude, tell me a little bit about what you want to share with us today, and
Yeah.
try the plain English and then we can be
Well,
consulting
apologies
speak.
on
No,
the.
no.
I'm not going to use a bunch of acronyms or business speak. I'll try the
Well,
sixth
I
reading.
love business speak. It makes me feel smart, but I'm not sure everybody agrees.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So what we're talking about today, it's apt that one of the users said, can AI fix the audio issues? It can fix a lot, right? But you got to make sure that you implement it correctly. And sort of akin to what I just said is, get in, look at the problem, figure out how it needs to be solved, and then present answers to that problem. Pun
Uh,
intended there.
yep. That's why you named it answer.
That is not even easier said than done. What we're finding is that it's quite confusing. Many people have large language implementation, well, I'll call them public AI models, are changing every day.
Yes.
Different adoptions off of different platforms, and customers are jumping from one to the other all the time. It's sort of that "Oh, this is the standard, right? Nobody ever got fired for bringing IBM. You could say OpenAI and Gemini and Anthropic are the IBMs of the world, but you've got three different, sort of standards, and they're different. And
Right.
so people will bring their answers to certain problems. And what we're finding is that implementation of that solution, this public AI model, is much more complicated because of the older systems and the old way things were built. And the way people think and the way people want to behave don't match with the sort of overlaying of like, we're just going to spread this AI over every problem and it's going to solve it all.
Okay, well, so I like that, and I feel the same way. I feel that we treat it as AI is one thing or a bunch of things, and we can just spread it like peanut butter over the slice of bread, and it'll solve everything. So, and you also talked about something that I think we're all feeling is that AI is constantly changing, right? Like last week, there were two big announcements that I just looked at this week called Claude Design and Google Stitch.
Yep.
And if you haven't looked at those 2 things, the
Yeah.
world just changed again. So,
Correct.
like, dude, it's a fascinating time to be applying AI, but to your point, how do you do that? Where do you do it? How do you manage the risk? And, one of the things I'm very passionate about that I know we're going to talk about a little bit or a lot is access control and security and how to
Hmm.
think about risks. And
Yeah.
I know we did a pre-meeting to sort of frame some of the ideas, but
Right.
I'm happy to update or take this anywhere you want to go because this is
Sure.
our time to really relate and teach me one thing that I can walk away with in
Sure.
this
Sure.
session.
I find the best way to teach is to use stories, right? Like we've passed fables, down since before writing was a thing, right? Writing on
Yeah.
cave walls. So I'll give you a real story. In a executive level meeting very recently, very, very recently, with the private equity partner running the meeting and saying, look, I want to make this a contest. The more tokens you use, the higher up you'll be on the leaderboard. And
Token maxing is,
correct.
yeah,
And that sounds cliche, and that sounds like I'm not insulting the meaning, but that you've heard that with the CEO of NVIDIA, you've heard that kind of with sort of the tech leadership at large in the West Coast big firms, tech firms, and so you're presented with this thing. You're like, I got to use all these tokens. What do I do? How do I? Now you've got the hammer, and you're looking for that nail, right?
yeah, yeah,
So during the rest of that meeting, there were breakout sessions and they were like, okay, you're going to come back with ideas on what you think a artificial intelligence or large language model implementation could do to help you. And people come back with ideas of like, oh, they're very specific ones, like it could do this sort of one thing for me. And people come back with ideas like this could help the whole company or this could help, sort of everyone. And so you sit there and you leave the room and now you're like, okay, I committed, soft committed, these aren't official projects, to doing this, solving this efficiency problem that I have here with AI. Now what?
yeah,
Do you go to the AI and say, here's my problem, help me now? You could.
right.
uh, But in reality, what you want to do is operationalize, meaning make the building through the large language model part of everyday job and function, just like coming in and logging in, firing up your CRM or whatever software that you use every day. This will be the same thing. And
Right.
that takes awareness, that takes education, that takes
Yeah.
guardrails, and that takes secure or at least visible implementation that has the right, I'll say, barriers as well as sort of walls up to control the way that deployment goes.
Okay, so let me ask you a question because you're hitting on something I think is very important, which is, when we start our day, when we log in, what do you do first? Well, maybe you check your messages, you check your Outlook or your Gmail. And so what you're saying is people need to start thinking about what would it be like if I opened up my AI? How would I
Hmm.
start my day? How could I integrate it into what I'm doing? And that's a very cool way to think about it, and I
Correct.
think that's a good way to teach how to think about it. But you said this very important thing is how do you do it with guardrails or all
Hmm.
of the boundaries so that you're not risking, somebody launching AI and maybe doing one that's public instead of the corporate one
Sure.
and spilling all of this information. It's like, dude, I didn't know. And I just used ChatGPT public version and there's no guardrails on that. So I love that first thought, which is let's just try it. And then the second thought is with constraints or however you talk about it. So teach us a little bit about how to think about that.
Sure.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's use this story time again, kids. Gather
Yeah.
around. We're going to talk about how somebody deployed a cloud a co-working instance into their
Yeah.
production HR environment with
Whoa.
to a database. I mean, nothing real dangerous here. You've got a coworker that's virtual and that's working 24/7, and this
Yep.
coworker was assigned to just kind of make some reports and aggregate things that the employee was doing on a kind of weekly basis to happen
Right.
overnight and make it all happen. Things were going great. They were able to, while they went away from work and came back, they came back to opening up the coworker, and all the work was done. Everything that I would have done for the day had already been finished for this one work stream. Fantastic.
Okay.
So they shared it with their department. Well, this person had access to this agent
Ooh,
mimicking this person's access to a database that the other people in the department didn't have access to.
I'm
And
getting worried.
yeah, and so when they started to use the agent, they started getting data back on tables, apartments, budgets, people that they normally wouldn't see. And this
Right.
happened very quickly. And
Yeah.
so what didn't happen was what I talked about before, the guardrails that needed to be put up for, we'll call it access control.
Yeah.
Sure that I can see this information, but John, you shouldn't see this information.
Exactly.
And you're able to walk it back, fine. We were able to come in and put the guardrails up and those things, but the genie's out of the bottle, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the type of financial information that was exposed it wasn't a breach, right? It wasn't a leak, say, but it was certainly something that internal confidential information was leaked to associates that didn't have access to that internal confidential information, and it caused a little bit of a political stir, and I'm sure that's something that'll come up on this associate's review. But
Yeah.
you fault them, right? Like they were given the
Right.
mandate to go do this thing. They weren't educated enough. They didn't have the awareness enough, and the company didn't give them the guardrails to implement it safely. Safely isn't like we're not dropping a nuclear bomb or something to hurt people, but in this instance, it wasn't safely deployed.
So I want to, can I interrupt and just,
Please.
yeah, yeah, like, dude, so this is very important because, as a data guy from way back, we always use the HR data example because it's so important. And when we talk about row based access policies or column based access policies or what data should be masked or what should be visible, all that RBAC stuff, role based access
Yep.
control and policies and all of the language we use as data nerds and data governance people, all of that applies directly to this use case. And it sounds like, and I hear this from Anthropic and a lot of others, is that, they want AI to have access to everything so it can be impactful. And I hear people say that every day here in San Francisco where I work. Just give it access to everything because it's going to be safe. And then at the same time, we know that certain, like the worst thing you can do is release salary information because then everybody's asking, like, why do people get paid to do what I do?
Right.
That, like, there's just so many bad things that can happen when HR or finance data just trickles out into the world. And because the person used or not one product's better than the other, but they used a coworker and it blew up in their face. And the blast radius of releasing financial information or salary information is a historical event that never goes away. The
Never.
CFO, the CEO, the board, everybody knows henceforth that there was a major blow up and that could cause people to retract and say, hey, dude, we got to slow down on AI, which is true, but you don't have to slow down everything. You just need to slow down where you start the experimentation. At least this is my theory, unencumbered with any knowledge of your use case, but I would be like, dude, okay, so maybe HR wasn't the place to start.
Right.
Maybe we could do something else. But just having a thoughtful investigation of what to think from a data perspective. This is why people at DAMA LA I'm excited to share with them how you think about AI and how
Yeah.
you think about controls because everybody that's part of this group understands data governance in their soul and they know this and they want to prevent these things. So if you're a DAMA LA member or a DAMA member anywhere, it should be using this is not your opportunity to say, no, don't do it, but yes, and let's do some controls. And so teach us how to think about it, man. Aaron, give us some nuggets of gold we can use when we're trying to sell your thinking about how to put access or controls around this stuff.
Sure thing. Yeah, and we can get as deep into this as you want to get, and have.
Well, whatever you wanna make appropriate, right? Like, let's keep everybody in the tent as much as we can, but we're allowed to do some nerd diversions for those that wanna hear that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So let's
And
talk about. Oh, go ahead. Did you have something else?
yeah, yeah, and Shori, let me also say that if you're listening to us now and you have questions, please feel free to throw some questions in the chat, and we'll look at those, and maybe I'll throw some over to Aaron, or either of us will pick one, and we'll talk about it. So you guys that are brave enough to listen to us do the recording are allowed to ask questions. Please go ahead. And Aaron, I should have done that announcement up front, but okay. So teach us something new.
Sure. And so, specifically to DAMA, right? You've got a globally recognized framework, the DMBOK, right? That has best practices, principles, knowledge areas, strategic data set management, enterprise asset classification, like all the common principles that are required for managing data. And that's a great way to think about approaching any implementation of a large language model, because framework standards deployment, while they're not necessarily developed, you can, because it's accessing data, both structured and unstructured, right? Database, vector database data, as well as file datas, right? The unstructured data that can sit in a file share or a file server.
Yeah.
You use the principles that you gather in, the recognized knowledge areas of the DMBOK to
Yeah.
do categorization, to do authorization, to do authentication, to do ingress and egress checks, to do availability checks, to do, like you mentioned before, role-based checks on the vector database itself. Whether or not you're using a particular technology, a Redis or a Pinecone for your vector database, we want to apply rules that are sort of universal.
Right.
That say, look, these are the things that you want to do to establish governance, to establish accountability. Maybe not ensure compliance, because we don't know how the compliance is going to be there yet, but we want to have that architecture, that modeling, the storage, all ironed out for the implementation before you give it to the HR person to tell them to point it to this database and go.
One of the things that you're talking about, Aaron, is this way of thinking about vector databases. And I remember you sent me an article that we should add to the chat when we publish this. That is some of the thinking you have written out in quite a bit of detail on your site. So for those of you who really want to noodle on vector databases or RBAC and how Aaron thinks about this, there will be supplementary material that we won't get into necessarily. We probably don't have time to explain what a vector database is or why you care, but I just want to say that out loud.
As it
And
relates
if
to
I've
a
lost,
vector database, yeah, I'll give you one easy example. If you're a Google shop right now, and you use Google Apps for your file storage, for sharing Google Docs, those sorts of things, one of the things you'll notice, much like if you're a Microsoft shop, but one of the things you'll notice in Google Drive is there's a Gemini agent that's up there that says, hey, do you have questions about the files that are in here? What's happening there? There is a layover of an artificial intelligence model that is indexing. So it's gathering all the information of the unstructured files that are in there. And unstructured files could be documents, images, spreadsheets, presentations, PDFs, right? These sorts of things that aren't in a database. Basically, anything that's unstructured is not in a database.
right.
So a large language model, in this case, Google's AI assistant, Gemini, you can type a question and say, where are all the documents that have to do with this project that I'm working on? And it'll come back and it'll say, here's the documents that have to do with this project that you're working on. So what happened in the background there? Well, a couple of things happened in the background there. One, the large language model was given access to that folder that you're looking at, and it might be just that folder. That folder might have subfolders in it that have multiple more files in them. But fine, in this case, we're looking at just one folder that has 50 files in it. It'll go through and it'll summarize those 50 files. And it'll say, hey, these 50 files all, talk about finance data. They talk about this customer and they talk about this project. Great. And that gives you sort of the answers that you need. And it went through and did that very, very quickly. Now, on the back end, what's happening is the large language model is indexing those files, translating them into what are called vectors, which are a way to store the data that is, it's not ones and zeros per se. It's data elements that all relate to each other, then relating that data and then giving you the response via what are called tokens, right? They're not words, but they look like words for you and me. And these tokens come out and they give you, hey, here's what's in these files, and here's all those things. And that's why it's easy to get off the rails very, very quickly, because I just talked about folders, subfolders, permissions that are tied to them.
Right.
And if you don't have confidential data categorization on that unstructured data, what's going to happen, right? If you're just
That's
doing this, oh, go ahead.
No, no, I was just gonna say that's a great example. I mean, and it's so practical because 'cause we're all a little worried. Do we use the Gemini agent or the Copilot agent on all of our documents on our hard drive? Well, dude, maybe there's some stuff I downloaded for coaching or something personal that I wouldn't want indexed and revealed by Google or Microsoft when it's composing an email for me. And so I love your example of teaching us not just why access control and classification is important, but also the fact that it's already indexing all your information anyway, and it has access to it. So if you're not thinking about how you put controls around it, now's the time to start. Those are some of the takeaways I have from what you were saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here and taking the time on this Friday afternoon or morning, wherever
Yeah.
you are, to sort of do this. I think Michael asked the first sort of
Yeah.
question. If posing a query to an LLM is a process, what are the objective metrics to the quality of the output, right?
Good question,
And I'm
Michael.
just to make sure, I'm hoping I understand the question right, but my answer is it's multifaceted. If a large language model is like a student taking a test, you need to
Yeah.
see if they did a good job, right?
Right.
Can't just say, that feels like a good answer. Cool. Okay, I'm just going to move forward. A lot of people do. They're like, yeah, that fits with what I was expecting. I'm just going to go forward. But in reality, that on the background, from a framework perspective, it should be truthful.
Yeah.
Like, just it's got to be the truth, right? It can't be a hallucination, right? Did it stick to the facts? Is it hallucinating, right? Is this and that's where have you noticed in your LLMs stations are starting to come
Yeah. Yeah.
on with things? The reason is not because it's well, the reason is it needs to show truth, right? You're just like in school, you had to cite your sources. It should follow the directions of what was prompted. So if I asked you something, it should answer what I asked you within context of what was asked, right? Explain this in, 3 sentences with no emojis. It shouldn't just give you a bunch of emojis as sort of your answer. So it's following your rules, right? It should be truthful. It should answer what you asked it. It should work, right? Like what it gave you should work. It should be concise, and it should be quick. Things that it's making you more efficient and it's making you quicker. If it's something that would have taken you a day, 3 days, 5 days, whatever, to do, it's right, it's quick, it's contextual, its truthiness is there, it's grounded, right? Its tone is good, its
Yeah.
consistency is there, and it's cited its sources to do that.
Yeah, and I just wanna say that this is an area of a tremendous amount of research and a lot of findings, right? So, I was listening to a guy from CMU, I think it's Anupam Data, who was at a company called TrueLens maybe, who was acquired by Snowflake. He came up with this thing called a GPA for agents. And if you Google GPA and data with DATTA or CMU, you'll find the paper. But essentially, it is because he was a prof, he wanted to call his evaluation framework GPA, but it's exactly what you said in that as we define how to measure something, we have to define that in a consistent way that can be applied. There has to be some sort of rubric, and it will vary based on what you're trying to measure, right? And I think one of the things I wanted to not forget is there is a cost factor to everything. So the token count. So we on another podcast, I was interviewing a guy who talks about this idea of the minimum viable context, which is what is the minimum amount of information, and so you have to consider how many tokens it would take to answer the question. And so all I wanted to say about this is not to confuse everybody, but to say that the way Aaron's talking about it is the way to think about it. There needs to be a way to measure the work. And the way you've laid it out makes a lot of sense. And it's an area of ongoing research. But if you're a data person, you already know that we have data quality measures that actually inform part of it, but are incomplete without a broader thoughts around uh, evaluation frameworks. And so maybe I've made it more confusing,
No,
but
you have.
I just
Have
wanted
not.
to
You
throw
have
that
not.
on top. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Because it's the one thing that people usually do at the very end of a project. It's they say, "Okay, now we've got it all running, it's all working," and then somebody says, "But is it right?" And so
Correct.
I've got a friend who's working at a company, and they have 2 different teams doing revenue agents, and they're getting different numbers. And they're asking, "Well, why is your revenue look like this and
Right.
mine looks like that?" And it turns out, well, revenue has 5 different meanings, and so et cetera, et cetera. We could go into a long we should interview that guy maybe
Right.
next, but the idea that you aren't measuring something is the problem, and if you are thoughtful like Michael, you would know, "Hey, I need something, and I can't just go in willy-nilly and not think about that," because ultimately, that's the difference between the toy that you make and then the system that you design that is actually valuable, right?
You hit on something I love that you just said, the toy
Okay.
you make. Because the question Melissa asked, right? Like, hey,
Yeah,
experience
yeah.
in production, what agentic, framework or governance that's there. I love the toy analogy. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad that you said that. And that totally we didn't plan this beforehand. So like I'm so happy that you said that because it reminded me of what I wanted to talk about. So you
Yeah,
said
yeah.
the toy that you make, right? Melissa, to your question, right? Like let's imagine that I have a toy and I have a robot helper, okay, in my house. The toy is kind of like my chatbot, right? If I ask the toy for a cookie, the toy tells me a story about a cookie. It can't move, it can't do anything. It just has its voice, right? And it tells me, oh, cookies are great, blah 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 blah. But if I have a robot helper, if I ask, and then this is my agentic, right? This is
Right.
my piece of co-working capabilities that has been deployed to my environment. I asked my robot helper, "Hey, I'd like a cookie," right? The robot helper is gonna get up, it's gonna go to the kitchen, it's gonna open the jar or package, it's gonna
Right.
pull out a cookie, and it's gonna bring it to you, and it's gonna say, "Here you go," right? Well, a lot happened there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The robot helper now has the keys to everything. Like it could go upstairs, it could go downstairs, it could go in my house and open the front door and turn on the stove and go in, go out, open the garage door. Like it could do all these sorts of things, right? Unless I mature the robot and
Yeah.
give the robot the guardrails and the traceability, the logging,
Yes.
and I give it a boss robot, right, to go through and check to ensure that my worker robot is doing the things within the frameworks that it needs to do, and the boss robot can hit the big red button and say stop, stop, stop. You're off the guardrails. You're not doing what I need you to do, right? So just saying, hey, get me that cookie is safe now when I've implemented the guardrails and the boss robot and the logging and the traceability to say that I have given the freedom for that robot helper to go do things, but I've also built the framework around the robot helper so that it can do those things safely and it can do those things in a manner where I trust it and I can go to sleep and have it do the things that I'm doing and wake up not worrying about it.
Okay, and so Melissa asked a hard part of the question was, where do you see governance breaking down most often? And what does a mature, audit-ready framework really look like in practice? Now, those are hard questions to me, but she asked you, thank goodness.
Sure.
So
So governance breaks down most often when it doesn't have visibility, like just plain and simple. And that's uniform across any technology that you're implementing, right? You don't know if it's an unknown, you can't govern it, right? You
right,
literally can't do it. And what's happening sort of with like shadow AI or
right.
see terms that are called the things, but departments are being told that and going out there and implementing agents and these sorts of robot helpers on their own without getting maybe IT and data management and these sort of teams involved is you don't have the visibility until it's too late, right? Or until it
Yeah.
happens. So that's a bad thing. That's a very bad thing.
Well, and so I want to say that what I've heard, and it sounds like what you're saying, is that if you're not creating transparency or trying to observe what AI is doing in your organization, if it's not a something that you make in part of your audit ready framework, you're going to miss something. And so that trend, and when I mean transparency and observability, I'm thinking more from technical terms, which means that everything is done, is logged in an immutable log so that you can have agents looking at the logs of other agents to see, hey, did you do something nefarious? That's one thing I've seen a lot of people talk about here is having agents monitoring the logs of other agents. Anyway, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that or yeah.
There's a word for that. It's called reasoning trace, right? It's saying all the thoughts that the agent had, I want to see. Like, show me how you came to this conclusion. And when you have reasoning trace logging or capabilities turned on, you can go back and so with your revenue example, you can go back and see, well, what were the inputs that it had that made this decision? And you can go, oh,
Hi,
this is where it went
beautiful.
wrong. And then you
So I want to call that, I want to relate that back to how teachers evaluate students and say,
okay,
in math, show me the work, right?
correct.
Like that's the exact analogy. It's like, dude, you didn't get the right answer, but show me how you reasoned. And that's what a good teacher always does. It says, well, because at least he learned or she learned this, but they didn't get this part right. And so this, what you called a reasoning trace or, the showing me the work actually really helps. And I think I want to relate it to the next question because they're asking something very important, which is about multiple choice. And let me see if I can summarize it. How do you guard against measuring things that are easy to measure? For example, the reason multiple choice is the standard for most tests for humans is that it delivers an output that's easy to measure and is kind of boring, right? You don't show your work when you're doing a multiple choice. So he says, or the person says, so many times in my work in DG, DQ, I feel stuck testing the easy things that don't deliver value, but deliver great pie charts and the like. Okay,
Right.
so you're right on the money, whoever asked that question. That is the problem okay, so Aaron, thoughts about that?
Yeah.
Teach me, think. Yeah,
No, yeah. If you're gathering data that isn't useful to gather, you're gathering the wrong data, right? If you're
exactly.
well, measuring
Stop.
on that data, then you're way
You
off.
have been blessed to
My
stop.
analogy there
The,
is a
yeah.
big analogy guy. So maybe your other guests are gonna listen to this and be like, "Dude, what is that guy a story time writer or what?" But like if you, I've used this analogy for photography, so I'm gonna use it a little bit applied here. You've got a chef, and the chef cooks great things. And you don't go to the chef and be like, "Wow, your pans are amazing." The chef has a capability in art, right? You go to that chef and you asked it to take a test on. Here's a multiple choice test on what temperature water boils at and food safety and blah blah blah. The chef passes with 100%, and she or he knows all about food safety handling and blah blah blah. And they have a great pie chart that says this chef is 100% accurate on all food safety handling things. Does that tell you how good their food?
Yeah. No, it's exactly the wrong
Yeah.
thing to measure.
So, well, to answer that, like measuring uptime, data completeness, right? That's easy for a test, and it's real shiny, and it's real clean, and it's real good. But you got to stop measuring the effort, right? And you got to stop measuring the outcome.
So
So,
tell us about some things we could measure about that chef because I love this analogy.
okay, yeah. So let's say we're measuring the chef on, not how clean or pretty the dishes look, but actual if the flavor content is in line with the restaurant and the theming and the
Right.
the dishes thing. If I give you a spaghetti and meatballs, does it taste like anchovies and pizza or does it taste like spaghetti and meatballs, right? So
Right.
if we measure the outcome and not necessarily the input process effort, we're going to get something that's much more meaningful.
Yeah. No, no, Michael, very funny. I heard a friend, the same friend that was measuring two different projects' revenue. He said it's like a prep station. I could see that one of the chefs just had a big set of instructions and it was like a messy kitchen and they threw together the meal and they got a revenue number. Whereas the other chef had a prep station and they had classified all their ingredients. So they knew that when they were pouring this white powder in, it was salt and not sugar. And so the analogy he was trying to use for a data governance perspective and the chef is they label their ingredients. They prepare their prep stations so that before they start cooking for a variety of guests, they've got all of the ingredients labeled, they're ready, they're prepped. All of the mechanical things that can be done to prepare the meal have been done in a systematic way. And if there's a repeatable process, we can start. So Aaron, I want to take your chef analogy and go to the nth degree on a later podcast. I know people will want to reach out to you and we'll have your
Sure.
bio and all of that stuff, but anything you want to sort of close with as parting thoughts?
Yeah. Again, you need to reach out to me through John, through whatever means necessary. Happy to have any conversation anytime in person or virtual. No problem. Yeah. As you're getting pressure and you are going to get pressure from your leadership to compete against the industry, the market, your competition, feeling like you're left behind sort of thing, understand that taking a pragmatic approach in doing things can move quickly, so long as you're ready for what you know is coming. If you leave this podcast and think, "Oh wow, that was great," and then you don't do anything on Monday to get your organization to start pushing towards this, you're going to get blindsided, and you're going to get that notification that says, "Oh hey, the marketing team is using this large language model and they're doing all this sort of stuff, and the dev team is using Jira's LLM, and the other team is using so and so," and now you're like, oh my gosh, the business is moving forward kind of without me. So start building your framework. You can use the things that you've already learned through DAMA to help build your framework, and make sure that you are starting to implement said framework and log everything as you're going through the next few days and weeks.
Okay, Aaron, you're great. And I'm thinking we're going to have a cooking show where we really get into extending the DAMA framework into the cooking show
Right.
analogy.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
okay, good. So I would like to thank everybody for listening to us. We are going to get better at recording and
Yeah.
making it interactive and lovely over time. Please, if you like what we're doing, please add some comments. Tell us what you like, what we could add, what we could do, and subscribe. We want to create momentum around the conversations we're having, and we want you to participate. Please, thanks for listening. And thank you, Aaron.
My pleasure. And again, I'm looking forward to the next time we
Let's
talk.
go have lunch. I'm getting hungry.
Exactly.
Okay.
Deal.
Take care. Thank
Cheers.
you, everybody. Bye for now.